This is the 2025 updated, absolutely everything you need to know for the thinking skills assessment in one place. It is going to be a long one, but do try and sit through the whole thing because I'm packing it full of every single strategy you need to get as close to or get 50 up 50 in this paper. I've solved every single question over the course of a week, and so it's all very fresh in my mind right now. I've run communities for you guys. Obviously, as you know, I've been posting videos and trying to help you guys out with this exam for quite some time. So this is just going to be a summary one. I don't think I'm going to need to do an update because this is just going to have everything in it. So it is a long one, but try and focus because it's going to save you time in the long run. So hopefully, if you're interested in this exam, you know by now that it is 50 questions, 90 minutes. Half of them are problem solving and half of them are what we call critical thinking. Within those two categories, there are lots of subtypes. With critical thinking, it's quite obvious because they do lay it out for you which questions come up. With problem solving, they haven't categorized it as clearly, but there are still, I've put them into categories, and I think those are the most common and they come up 95% of the time. So let's start off with what score you should be aiming for. So obviously it's a little bit different depending on which degree you're going for. So PPE, I would say anything around 42, 43, that's pretty strong. And I would say getting a very strong score in critical thinking is kind of a given. Now, for economics and management, over the last few years, I've been running a little community and trying to help some of you guys out. And obviously, you guys self report and tell me your grades and things. Based off of that, and then obviously what's on freedom of information and the increase in competition for E&M, just assume you need to get as close to 50 as possible. Even 45, 46 isn't enough to guarantee you an interview anymore, it looks like. So 50, I guess, is the only way to go. Sorry to say. And it is possible. It is possible, but start now. So then the other degrees, obviously, they're going to have other criteria as well as this exam that they look at. So it's slightly less important. I would say getting anywhere like 37, 38 consistently, that's a decent score, and it shouldn't hold you back from getting an interview. So the first of the myths that I think you're probably believing is that 50 out of 50 is not possible, that this exam is extremely difficult. Yes, it's difficult because you don't have a lot of time. Is it difficult if you do enough practice and you start with sufficient headway? So basically starting now? No, it's really not. There's usually one of two reasons that you're not doing too well in this exam. And one is that you just haven't given yourself enough time. And so you just haven't given yourself enough time to familiarize yourself with questions and practice enough of them. The second reason is that you are approaching each question as a new question. So every time it's like a new world. You're thinking, oh, how do I solve this one? That's obviously not going to work in the long run. You need to develop a strong method that you can keep improving. If you do that, then you're going to get stronger, you're going to get faster, and you're going to make fewer mistakes. That's what I'm going to try and share with you today. Now, the second myth is that you can't predict what will come up. You have to treat each question as new. That's absolutely not true. As I said, I have painstakingly and tiresomely gone through all 750 questions in the space of about 5 days, I think. And in doing that, I have seen cases where there have been duplicates. And I'm talking not just similar, I'm saying identical passage, but in different years, but the question is actually different. So we can take a look at it now. And what I'm showing you now and what I'm using to search is the site that I've put together. Some of you, if you've seen my videos before, you might have noticed, you might have seen a site where I'd categorize the questions into kind of groups so that it'll be easier for you to practice. I've gone one up on that basically, and now you can search everything by year, by word, from either the question text or the answers. And I'm going to show you some other cool features that I've added that will make your revision a little bit more efficient. So first things first, I'm going to show you the duplicate question. So I remember it was plastic was the passage. So if I look at the search here, so you can see question one in 2010 was this main conclusion question. And it was saying, in the case of plastic drink bottles, recycling is not the best answer to the problem of garbage disposal. And it goes on and on. Then if you carry on, in 2008, you had question 29. And that one was asking for the underlying assumption. But it says in the passage, in the case of plastic drink bottles, recycling is not the best answer. You can see it is exactly the same passage, but one is asking for the main conclusion. One is asking for the assumption. One is from 2008, the other one is from 2010. So what does this mean? Yes, okay, in this case, the passage itself is identical. Has this come up again? I think it happened one other time. But what does that mean that it has only happened those two times? Absolutely not. Yes, it might not be the identical passage, but they are so similar, the majority. I would say in 95% of cases, these passages, the questions on both the problem solving and the critical thinking side are very, very almost identical to each other. They just change context and maybe a tiny bit of logic, but it's essentially the same chain and the same pattern every single time. So it's actually harder to find a unique question. I'll show you one that I think is genuinely kind of unique and as a result difficult to categorize. Now, if this one here in 2022, question 44, this cat and mouse game. Now, this one was genuinely unique. So the method for solving this is not like the others. I'll show you in a minute the categories that I've organized problem solving into, but this one It's kind of like game theory ish, like a very, very basic version of it. But what it means is that this one you do have to approach as a new question because you've got to work through the steps one by one. It's not something that you just apply general theories that you've been practicing. So I would say overall, there are few truly unique questions. Majority are very similar. So what does that mean? Again, you need to learn a general method and a general strategy, and you need to work on improving that, not approaching each question as a new thing. Okay, so let's take a look at some of those categories and let me show you some similar questions so that you can see what I mean. So if you go into this dashboard, if you go into question packs, I'm just going to basically make a quick question pack. I'm just going to call it A. And then I'll show you, for example, problem solving, and I'll show you optimization. And there's 26 of them. So there's quite a few over the years, right? And bear in mind, there's like, what, 15 years worth of questions. And then you only get, of each type of question, there's like probably two per year or something like that for the really common ones. So that just tells you how repetitive this exam is. So I've just selected 12 in this particular paper. Actually, sorry, I'm going to select fewer than that. I'm going to go with just three. As you can see, they're all organized for you here, and you can just select which ones that you want to have in your pack. You can customize it like a tiny bit, and you can also see roughly what you're getting. Let me just choose some random ones so there's a bit of random. You can include an answer key, you can include the date if you want, not really necessary. Okay, so once you've got that pack created, what you want to do is go into your packs, and then to practice it, you need to click practice. You can also download it as PDF if you want to print it out. Okay, so now if you look here, this is an optimization question, right? So I picked optimization. So you can see the question will always be asking something like the maximum number of hot drinks. Okay, so there's one method to solve that. There's always the same method. So once you know how to do that, you can apply it every single time. Look at the next one here. So here again, what is the maximum number of points that could be scored when the next token is placed on the board? Again, this is an optimization question. And then third here, we've got what is the minimum number of extra sets of magnetic letters that the cinema needs to buy? Again, very similar question structure and how it works. And so you don't need to think about it. You can just approach it as you do. Right. Now, I didn't do very well in that. I wasn't actually reading the question, but if you click review, you can go through it, and also there is a solution for each question in case you still don't understand it after you've looked at the questions. And that is just one of the functions that I've built into this, again, to help you guys. Okay, so anyway, that hopefully gives you a little glimpse into there are so many predictable similar questions in this. You do not need to spend your time memorizing a new strategy for 750 questions. You need to learn maybe 10 strategies total. I can't remember off the top of my head how many subtypes there are, but some of the critical thinking ones as well, I'm just about to tell you about, they are all solved in exactly the same way. The first and most important strategy for critical thinking is that you all learn how to read a passage quickly. And I don't mean just skim read it and hope for the best. I mean, do you have a proper strategy? Do you know what you're expecting to see in the passage? And how are you using that to speed up your comprehension? Now, one of the curriculums that I've developed, not for you guys, but for a program that I run in South Korea, is for one of their English exams at high school. And the questions are really, really similar to the thinking skills assessment, which is why I even bothered to develop something for them. But anyway, the method and system that we use out there is this method that I've created called, I just call it PLU. Okay. And what it means is that the P is for purpose, which is the main conclusion sentence, essentially. So, what is the purpose of writing this passage? Why did the writer do it? Logic is L, and so that is your train of reasoning. What is the argument to take you to the purpose sentence? How do we get to the conclusion? E is evidence. Now, evidence is called evidence because it sounded better than C, which is what I wanted to put, which is context. But essentially, we have the main argument, we have the general argument, and then writers they apply it to a certain context, to an example. And that's what I mean by that. Certain sentences are just for the point of context. And then W, weakness. Now, you shouldn't expect to see weakness sentences exactly in these kind of passages. That is there more for the Korean exam. So I'm just going to ignore that. We're going to focus on P, L, and E. But what I'm saying is you have to read a passage while skimming through and understanding, okay, what sentence is this? Which one is this? Where does it fall in my argument structure? And that's how you read quickly. That plus a method that I call simplify. And I'm going to show you both of those now. And this is the way that I read. Okay, so let's start off with how I read a sentence. So you've got the passage here, right? So have a read through. I don't know how you currently do this. Maybe you just kind of read left to right and you go, the rules of baseball don't just regulate the behavior of the players, they determine the behavior that constitutes playing the game. That's great. And then maybe you'll think, okay, so what does that mean? Do I reorganize that in my head? What do you do? So what I do is this kind of method of, let's say, look at this sentence here, okay? And I ignore the Korean, it's not for you guys, obviously, but the English, okay? So what we've got here says the rules of baseball don't just regulate the behavior of the players, they determine the behavior that constitutes playing the game. What do I read in my head? I read it like this. So rules in baseball allow people to play the game. So where have I got that from? What I do is I always identify the subject. What is the main, who is the, who, what are we talking about here? Every sentence has a subject, right? And in this case, it's rules of baseball. And then it also says here, then this next sentence, it says, don't just regulate the behavior of the players. If the sentence structure is something like, don't just do something, don't just do X, it in fact does Y, do you need that first part where it says, don't just do X? Obviously not. That's not going to be the main point of that sentence. So in that case, I would just ignore that part of the sentence and I would just go straight to, okay, so what do the rules of baseball do? Looks like they determine the behavior that constitutes playing the game. And they've used a lot of kind of unnecessarily flowery, kind of roundabout way of saying it. But what does it mean? It just means it allows, determines the behavior that constitutes people to play the game. Okay, that's all it means. So just simplify it like that. Have a look at the second one here as well. Rules do not prevent people from playing baseball. They create the very practice that allows people to play baseball. So again, we have our subject, which is rules. And we do not need this part here. We don't need to understand that rules do not prevent people from playing baseball. We need to know this part, which is that they allow people to play baseball. So in my head, when I read, all I'm doing is cutting out unnecessary elements and just saying the main point. And what that helps you do is obviously read a lot quicker whilst organizing that information and understanding it at the same time. And so that's how someone like me could probably read one of those critical thinking passages in about 10 seconds. It's not possible without some sort of method. You don't have to use this method. You can have your own method, but the point is you need one. You can't just read and pray. Okay, so then how does the kind of structure come into it? Now, this is the PLE that I was just talking about. So I've broken it down here into purpose, logic, and evidence sentences, right? So I've found that this is the purpose sentence. The first one is obviously missing a blank, so we'll just stick to this one, okay? So what I've done is I've realized, okay, it starts off with the purpose, it then explains some example, and then it follows up with logic. I've got some more context, I've got some more logic, and then I have my main conclusion here. And I would just simplify this sentence. You can pause and read it and try and simplify it yourself, but it essentially goes to this: rules both limit and create rules. Roles. That's how I would read that personally. And this is all you would need in a main conclusion question to answer the question. Now, for some of the other questions, you need the logic as well, but you can see the logic is not that much, just two of the sentences. I do understand this is not a TSA passage, but we'll look at one of those as well. But I'm just trying to give you an idea of how you can learn argument structure. Okay. So now let's take a look at an actual TSA question, a main conclusion one.
Okay, so I've just typed main conclusion into the site and I'm just going to pick a random one, maybe just this one. So here, we need to read and try and use that method that I've just taught you. So the first sentence: the Human Rights Act should apply to soldiers in the UK and at their overseas bases, but not to those fighting in the heat of battle. That's obviously a purpose sentence. We know that because they're telling us to do something, right? So this is an action that we think we should do. And in this case, it says should, so that's easy, right? Now, obviously, we know that is the main conclusion sentence, but we'll go on so that I can show you the structure. Second sentence says, the concern is that the HRA could damage the effectiveness of the armed forces. What type of sentence is that? That is the logic. Why should we apply a certain act to soldiers in the UK, but not those fighting in the heat of battle? Well, the logic is because this could damage the effectiveness of the armed forces. Look at the last sentence. Commanders making split-second decisions in battle may be paralyzed by fear that those decisions will come. That's your context, right? So that's an example, an application of what do we mean by effectiveness? How could that effectiveness actually translate in the war zone? There you go. So what sentence do you need? Just that first one. So simplify it. The Human Rights Act should apply to soldiers in the UK, but not those in battle. Okay, so now look through your answer options. A says the HRA should apply to British soldiers away from battle situations, but not in them. That's exactly the same thing. The answer is A. Just double check. There we go. That's how simple it is. So do you see, by understanding argument structure, you are never left with any doubt in your mind because you can go through, simplify, and tick off as you go. That is the reading method that I recommend, but again, find the one that works for you.
Okay, so for critical thinking subtypes, assumption, weaken, flaw, and strengthen, you answer in pretty much exactly the same way. So the only different ones, main conclusion, which only goes some of the way that you need compared to these others, and then principle and parallel, those are separate. Okay. But for these four, they are pretty much exactly the same method. And most of the time, they have very overlapping answers as well. Because what is an assumption, but something that you need for it not to be a flawed logic? Or what is something that weakens something if not a flaw that's been applied in context, right? And that's pretty much what I'm going to take you through. So let's start with flaw, okay? Because I think it's the simplest, most straightforward out of them. So with a flaw question, you do three things. You identify, you read it, and you identify where does the logic break down. So of those logic sentences that you find in the chain of reasoning, and by chain of reasoning, I mean A leads to B leads to C leads to D, or whatever it is, where in there is there something missing? Is there something misunderstood? Is there something misinterpreted? The list of flaws, I could go on and on, but there are about five main types. I would go through those now, but this video is going to get too long. So go check out some older videos where I've posted about it. Where does that logic break down? What you then do is you want to summarize that into a generally applicable point. So nothing that's particularly for that passage. And 95% of the time, it's something general. 5% of the time, it's something in context, which is fine as well. But it's easier to think about it as a rule, as a general thing first, and then you would want to try and solve it. Okay, so let's look at that example together. So here we've got all British students need to study a foreign language. The reason being, we live in a rapidly expanding global market and we need to know foreign language if you want to get to the highest work level. And if all students studied a foreign language, there would be more British people at the heart of global business. Okay, so break down that argument. What is A, B, C? So A is you study a foreign language at school, equals, what are we saying it equals? More British people at the heart of global business. What is the reasoning for it? We're saying you need a foreign language. A foreign language is essential if you want to get to the highest level. Okay. So we're saying it's essential to it's essential to know a foreign language if you want to work at the highest level. We should study a foreign language at school. This is going to mean, therefore, more British people at the heart of global business. This, if you think about it, is a necessary condition. Okay. We're saying you need to know a foreign language. It is essential to work at the highest level. What else do you need though? Obviously, not just a foreign language. That cannot be it. So this is necessary, but not sufficient. Okay, so that is your flaw. Then you want to go and look at your answers here. So you've got the writer treats a necessary condition as a sufficient condition as A, which is the answer. Okay, so this is your flaw. You want to find your ABC, the logic, the chain of reasoning, generalize it, apply it, and then match it to the answer. So, how does this differ for something like a weakening question? Now, the only difference for a weakening question, let's go up and just do a quick search for one so I can show you what I mean. You want to follow pretty much the same steps, right? But a weakening point, what it's doing is that it's giving context to the flaw. So let's say for that question that we've just looked at, we said that knowing a foreign language is essential, but it's not sufficient, right? So then if this were a weakening question, you would want something that said like, to work at the highest levels in the business world, you need to have a 4-year degree or something like that. That is the application of the necessary but not sufficient condition. Okay, so let's have a look at an example here. So here we've got a 2-month study of major producers of ivory products showed that worldwide demand for elephant tusks had fallen sharply for ivory had fallen sharply. Therefore, it's safe to say that there's going to be a general decline in elephant poaching. So, what is the flaw? What would you say is a general flaw? We're saying we looked at a study and it showed that people don't really want elephant tusks. And so there's going to be no more poaching. So, the general flaw would be something like, okay, but what if there's some other reason for poaching that isn't to do with tusks, right? And so, if it were a flaw question, that's what you'd be trying to match. In a weakening question, you need to apply it here and say, what is a different reason people kill animals, right? So the answer is going to be C, the worldwide demand for ivory fluctuates. Okay, so the demand for ivory is fluctuating, so poachers stockpile. Okay, so even if the demand for ivory is down, people still want to poach the elephants. And so the answer is C, and that is your application of that general flaw that we found. So this is what I mean when I say you solve them in exactly the same way. So then what is the difference with assumption? What is assumption but a gap in the logic that you need to be true? Otherwise, that argument is going to become flawed. So again, it comes back to a flaw, right? So let's search up an assumption question and try to apply some of those skills that we've just looked at. So let's look at this example for a assumption question. So success in modern America is measured by the quantity of how many things people have, and a lack of things means one is said to be unsuccessful, and therefore people without those material possessions are going to feel like a failure. So what is the flaw here? Where does that breakdown in reasoning happen? Well, we've said success is equal to more possessions, and therefore no possessions equals failure. So that's kind of the flaw there, because what do you mean? We can make fine, we can say having more things equals successful, but a lack of things means somebody is said to be unsuccessful. Okay, but why would those people then feel a sense of failure? It doesn't lead from, just because you feel unsuccessful, it doesn't have to lead to failure. That's the flaw. Okay, so they've skipped a step there. If they've skipped a step, that's the gap in the logic, then that's the assumption. Okay, so let's look through the answer options. If you skim them quickly, so E says people in America with few material possessions want to be seen as successful. So that is the gap then filled in. Okay. So you're only going to feel like a failure if indeed you wanted to be seen as successful. Then, yeah, fine, you can say it. So that little bit is missing, and that's going to be the answer. Just double check. And yes, it's correct. So strengthening questions, also exactly the same. What you want to do is find the area of weak logic or the area that is lacking something, and then think about something to improve it. But because it's a strengthening question, same as a weakness question, you want to put it in context. So we're looking for an example, actual evidence, right? So let's look at this question together. We're saying high street stores shouldn't be allowed to sell financial products. So that's the conclusion. And what's the logic? Consumers should not be misled into buying products they don't need by staff who don't understand what they're selling. So financial products, you need to know financial services, and very few high street retailers actually have members of staff that can explain benefits and disadvantages. So first sentence, we've got the main conclusion, then we've got some logic, and at the end we've got some context there. Hopefully you can see that. Now, the argument against selling it is because the staff don't know things, and so they're mis-selling things, they're making mistakes here. So what's going to strengthen the argument is anything that generally proves that point, right? We have to say, yes, they shouldn't be able to sell them because, whatever. So strength questions, they're the rarest type of question. There's really not very many. And here's your reason why. It's because it could be one of 10 million things, right? But we're looking for what most strengthens, right? So have a look at the A to E. Which one gives the best evidence of your staff? According to our logic, it's the staff don't know things and they're mis-selling things. A says many high street stores have been fined by the financial regulator for mis-selling financial products. That's going to be good for us because that is evidence that the staff indeed do not know what they're selling, therefore they're getting into trouble, and that leads to the conclusion, and that nicely backs up our logic. Okay, for principal questions, I'd say 8 out of 10 times the structure of the passage goes like this. First, you've got a kind of main point or the main principle, and then the rest of it is just an extended example. So it's just kind of going on and on and on about the same thing. So most of it you can cut through the noise and you can just find the principal sentence, apply it, and match it to the answer. That's all you need to do. Okay. 2 out of 10 times you do need to read the whole thing because the whole thing is an example, and so you need to read and simplify it. But you got to hope for, there's only 2 principal questions per paper, right? So you got to hope that you get a nice easy one. But let's look at an example and I'll show you what I mean. So if you have a quick skim through this passage, we're saying it's common for people to think that, in principle, good things for society, for serious mental health problems is good. But if the project's going to be where they live, then they would prefer it's not next to them. And so they approve of such ideas, but they don't want any negative effect on themselves. We don't really want to go back to these outdated practices because then people with mental health problems will be in remote areas. There's going to be no contact with the general population. So we have to accept that these projects can only work if we live near and interact with people they're designed to help. And then you get this final sentence, practice what you preach. You could have solved this question with that one little sentence there, practice what you preach. If you say you believe in something, you got to do it and abide by those rules yourself. The rest of it, as I said, is just an extended example. So which one of these answers A to E is saying practice what you preach? If you have a quick look here, it says here, people who think more money should be spent on the health service should not complain when their income tax is increased to fund it. Practicing what you preach, right? And so the answer in this case is going to be B. So hopefully that makes sense with principal questions. Okay, parallel reasoning questions. I know a lot of you find this confusing, and fair enough. So I'm going to give you a nice, easy trick to it. I would say 8 out of 10 times it is one of the two following structures. And you might get a little bit of difference on like which tense it is and if it's positive or negative. But most of the time, number one is going to be if Y, then Z. Z, so Y. So it's always something conditional where you need something to happen for an outcome, and then it's going to be something like this condition either was met or was not met, and therefore that outcome happened or did not happen. That's the most um, common case. The second case is something like if Y and Z then Q, so two conditions, and then it says something like no Y or like no Z. So one of the conditions isn't met, so therefore no Q. Or maybe it's saying both conditions haven't been met. But those are the most common. So yes, you could look at it and try to solve it every time. Is that really time consuming? Yeah. Should you memorize some of these structures in advance and then just be like, yeah, that one fits that one and apply it? Yes, that's what you should do. So let's have a look at some examples here. In order for it to be possible to rain, clouds must be present. So the condition that we need is clouds being present. So that's X for rain. And then it says here the weather forecast is predicting clear skies, so there is no chance of rain. So no clouds, no condition met, and so no rain. Okay, so simple. Let's look at another one. You only win an election if you gain a majority of votes. So to win an election, you need to meet the condition of votes. You must have gained a majority of votes because you were named the winner in the election. In this case, the condition was met because we saw the outcome. So yeah, it might change in terms of like, did you see the outcome first? Was the condition met first? And are we predicting? Is it in the past? Is it in the future? But aside from that, it's very, very commonly one of these structures. So just that's going to be the easiest way to do it. 2 out of 10 times, you've got to work it out. Okay, I can try and make a list of like the most common structural types because I've literally just been so general there. I can make a list of a few more if that would help you. So just leave that for me in the comments if that's what you would like to see. But otherwise, fine. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for critical thinking. I think that should be giving you a good overview. I'm going to move on to problem solving now.